First of all, thanks for being here. I'm Drew. This is Betsy, Frank, Malcolm, and Anisha, and we'd like to talk to you about the Urban Informatics project we've been working on for the last 6 months or so. So we've created a prototype of a web-based mapping system that increases transparency in property transactions. And since that's not exactly what I said, I'm going to leave this slide up for just a second. Thanks. So in doing so, we looked at 4 values, and a lot of these are fairly self-explanatory, but I'll go through them really quickly anyway. The first one we looked at is a listing value, which is the advertised selling price. You could think of it as a price you might find on a real estate website. The second thing we looked at was market value, which is an assessed value from a real estate organization, from a professional organization. And the last 2 were of great interest to us, and I'll tell you why. But first I'll say registration value is your declared purchase price. So when you register your property with the government, you write down this price, this is the price that you would have bought the property for. And related to that are guidance values, which are government set minimum property values per unit area. So guidance values are interesting because there's something called a stamp duty, which is a form of property tax based upon them. And if you have a minimum guidance value, you have a perverse incentive to underreport your purchase price. If your guidance value is something, why would you say that you spent any more than that? So you might declare your purchase at the guidance value and then pay the rest in cash. Some other issues with developing markets we looked at is a thin market problem is traditionally in India, there's a very low property turnover. You might buy property and it might pass through generations. A figure that we heard was once every 30 years would a family or group of people tend to buy something. So that means up-to-date pricing information is often absent, or at the very least, it's highly out of date. And finally, another really important aspect of our project is there's no one value that really captures price. And this is true of most opaque markets, like developing markets. So one of our guiding questions is, how do we capture the true value of property? I'm going to hand it over to Frank next.
So one of the main problems we found with this was that it created information asymmetry in the market, both for buyers and for the government. As Drew had mentioned, there's a stamp tax that is affiliated with the guidance values and the registration value that is then registered with the local government. With all of these different values, the listing value, registration value, guidance value, with all of them being scattered in different places and not having one place where buyers or the government can collect all of these, it created a very big problem for people trying to buy property, not knowing which sources were reliable, and also leads to government losing taxes on the stamp duty. So one of the things that we wanted to do with our prototype was to collect all of these different values, the listing value, guidance value, etc., put them in one place where users, whether that's buyers or the government, can look to one place, find all of these values, and find a way to compare the values so that they can look for them in the future and maybe update them continuously so that they can have some type of metric to follow as time goes on and the guidance values get updated. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the scope of the project and how we got to this point, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the mapping. Initially, we were looking at one district in Bangalore that was that we were looking to set guidance, look at the guidance values, map the guidance values, and do something very basic like that. One of the issues we ran into was that there was no official boundaries, so no polygon boundaries of what a neighborhood actually looks like. A lot of the neighborhoods, when we were talking to people, bleed into one another, therefore we couldn't find actual guidance values to stick to one particular location. So what we did next was, one thing I like to say is, as somebody who does a lot of mapping, your maps are only as good as your data, and every week our data was changing. Every week we would get new data and find issues with the data, clean the data, and then we would find more information, and it was great. It was a good experience, but doing that iterative process really helped us learn so much more about the real estate market here in Bangalore, and kind of raised a lot more questions and gave us answers. So one of the things that we ended up going towards was using apartment data. Apartment data has different, apartments have different guidance values than other properties, but we decided to go with apartment data because apartments represent about 30% of the current registered properties, and it is the fastest growing market in Bangalore. So by using the apartment data, we're able to find specific localities that then we can, localities or neighborhoods that we can then attach the guidance values to, and then from there we were able to update not only the guidance value but also the listing value and the market value from these other sites where we scraped the information from. And then after we created a few maps, we got all the data in order, we then started to turn towards our mapping interface and the web prototype, which Betsy is going to talk about.
So these are the final wireframes that we based our interface off of. We had two main trajectories, both reached from the main homepage that you're allowed to either, which allows you to either search by landmark or locality, or allows you to browse the entire map of Bangalore. This kind of reflects our two interested users, which would be someone who has already thought of or found a property that they're interested in on one of the more conventional websites and wants to delve further into their research, and also government researchers or nonprofits or educational institutions who are interested in looking for trends and city or district-wide information. So this trajectory is the search by landmark or locality, which gives you a drop-down list with our finite localities and landmarks, because there's so many ways to spell things and so many landmarks in the city that we have a set list that we can choose from. It takes you to the exact location where you wanted to look, and there's two main pop-ups. The district or ward pop-up here on this, where you can get aggregate data, and also the individual apartment pop-ups, which you can, which are all clickable. And the next trajectory is the browsing of like the entire city, and both of these different pathways allow you to narrow your search by three main filter layers. These are the amenities, which include IT parks, search, transportation, metros, and bus stops, as well as districts, which include currently SROs, wards, and with the opportunity to add on to these as desired or as data becomes more available. And within each of those three main filters, you can filter further by the budget or spectrum of the values that we have. And now Anisha is going to show you our prototype.
Okay, so this is the landing page for our prototype, and so you either search by locality or landmark, and we have point data for localities and landmarks. So you select your point from a list and it'll take you there. For example, if you click this, so the blue point, it shows you where that particular locality or landmark is, and that is for people who want to who's searching specifically, so they want to place themselves somewhere in the map as a starting point. But if you don't, then you can click the browse map option, which takes you to our main map page, and you just basically have the map of Bangalore pulled up here. You can add districts, so you can add wards, DROs or SROs, and in ward data, if you click on a ward, it'll give you basic aggregate data for the ward. When we interviewed a number of research organizations, and they mentioned that they would like aggregate data so that they could see patterns in the property prices across Bangalore. So this will tells you the average guidance value, etc., of apartments within that ward. If you're interested in a particular ward, you zoom in to it, and yeah. You have very specific data. I mean, you have additional information about the ward, like the population, and broken down into male and female. And you can change that. Like, you can click on other wards and get change the information, the ward you get information for. Or you could. Square foot. Additionally, you can color the wards by all these 4 options. So that gives you like a cluster of the apartments. So it will tell you that there are 276 apartments in this area, 15 in that, and 48 over there that we have data for. And currently it's colored by guidance value. So you can see where it's higher and where it's lower. You can also add amenities. So you can add schools, and it gives you like aggregate data for the school. And so it tells you like there are 155 schools here, and that helps you figure out how schools affect, like availability of schools affect things like property prices. So we have schools, major bus stands, metro stations, and IT parks. And we had a number of amenities, and you can add more at any time, but we felt that these were the ones that actually affected how people choose properties. And you can also filter the apartments by price. So you can filter the apartments by price. So we have like a slider, and that will change the clustering. If you zoom into the map, so it just has the opposite thing from my computer, so I keep zooming out. Yeah, so if you zoom into the map, you get individual apartments start showing up in like individual schools, and you can click on them to get, I mean, for schools, you'll just get the name. And if you click on like an individual apartment, there's a pop-up which shows the data we have. And you can pop this out to the side so you can compare it with like other apartments, and you can choose to see a graph. And the graph basically shows you okay, so the graph apparently won't show up, but usually it compares the prices for your apartment with the average prices of the ward. And that's basically what our interface does currently. Yeah, so this is our graph. And you can save the graph as like a PNG or PDF or anything you like. So now I'm going to hand it over to Malcolm.
Pull that back up. Okay, so looking ahead, we're very interested in seeing what more we can do with this. As Frank said earlier, it's only as good as the data that you have. So we've kind of taken what we have and tried to aggregate it at different levels. So we have the SRO, the DRO on the ward level. But we were interested also in seeing like what it looks like if you break it down further than the ward level, and if you take it to another scale, take it to the city level. Because if you can compare different cities, you can see how the values are broken up in different ways and what could be more useful and how that can influence decisions and values. We're also interested in making this data accessible, both as maybe a download and also as a web request or something like that. And we're interested in seeing in updating the values using one of our partners, IAM. They collect these values, and so we're interested in having it updated automatically from their repository. Another thing we're looking at is in the future, if we get more data that has a time element to it, we can see how these values can change over time, over a longer period of data collection. We're also interested in additional functionality and seeing what other things would be useful for people who are looking at it for research or for just personal research or in real estate. Another thing is we didn't get a lot of time to actually test it with many different kinds of users. So we had a little bit of internal testing, but we would like to see more about what are the decisions we've made, how they affect people's thoughts and perceptions about the data and its actual usage, and if the comparisons that we're making make sense to a lot of other people. Okay. We also want to start a conversation about how these values can be looked at differently, and how can you think about this in a different way from like what's already provided. So some of our findings, we did a lot of interviews in the beginning stages and actually throughout the process. And so it's been kind of an iterative process, as Frank said earlier. And we've collected a lot of new data and got rid of old data and continually been updating. So the interviews really gave us the contextual space for what we wanted to do. So we decided from that to use apartments and to provide aggregate data and to think about how it can be expanded and also brought down to a more specific level. Input from organizations like people at IHS and IAM, IITB, IIITB, and Fields of View gave us ideas about where the guidance values actually come from and what kinds of things it's supposed to actually signify, and how the differences in these values can capture different things like people's perceptions of, the value of the property and how much they actually want to move there and live there for a long period of time. So we had a lot of unexpected collaborations, and we found that working with a lot of these people, everybody is very happy to give you their data and see like what you can do with it and how you can manipulate it and combine it in meaningful ways. So we've had a very collaborative project in that way. And Nisha has been specifically helpful for her, being a student here and knowing how things are here and having connections herself with different startups and different organizations. So I'll pass it off to Drew to end the presentation.
Finally, we'd like to thank our partners right here at IIHS, IIITB, and IIMB. Everyone's been extremely helpful, and we'd like to thank you for listening, and we would invite your comments and questions.
So I remember you having some trouble with the different formats and kinds of data that you got along the way, and I was wondering how you've considered the way that you set up your data now so that it can be more accessible in the future to others.
So we have always, from the beginning, planned to make this able to be expanded in the future. So the same type of way you represent something that is a ward, you can also use it to represent a city or an imaginary boundary that you might create. So what we're thinking of is we can take all these points, and as we add new variables or new attributes to the data, we can show that in a similar way through some aggregation at these different boundary levels and make it available in that way, in the same type of way you would access a ward or an SRO. So actually, we have been trying to contact many state agencies, and we actually have, I think, a meeting tomorrow after, after this presentation. So we have been trying to contact as many people as possible, and it has been a little bit difficult to have people give us their time for that from the state agencies specifically.
I noticed that you had 4 different values that you listed at the start of the presentation, and a lot of them are easy to get, but the actual price that somebody paid is information that is very, very difficult to get. And I heard you say that you got a lot of data very easily. So I'm wondering on that aspect if you could talk about what was the actual price data and how did you obtain it?
That's a good question. First of all of our data is open source. It's all accessible. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but something we were talking about earlier is most of these values exist. You can find them online, but they're in scattered places. We used a couple different statistical techniques to get the most likely value. For example, the guidance value was actually the mode of all the guidance values in the area because there were so many conflicting pieces of information. We had to, or actually our partners decided that was the best way to go about it. That so-called dark money problem is something that still exists, and it's not something that we foresee changing anytime soon. We have 2 references in our project to that. One is that I Bought a Property site aims to anonymously capture the true price paid for something. Hopefully we'll be able to integrate with that in the future. And the second thing is, in absence of a really solid property price, we hope to inform researchers and consumers by providing a range of them. It would be excellent if we could have that one price, but in lieu of that, we decided to do a spread of prices to kind of come up with, to try to best capture the true price.